The morning sun cast long shadows across the cobblestone square outside Buckingham Palace. Tourists gathered behind the iron barriers, cameras ready to capture the famous changing of the guard ceremony. Among the crowd stood the Morrison family, visitors from a small town in Yorkshire. Sarah Morrison clutched her daughter, Emma's hand tightly as they pushed through the gathering spectators to get a better view. Emma was 7 years old. With bright eyes that still sparkled despite the exhaustion that weighed on her small frame, a pink knitted cap covered her head where golden curls once fell. Underneath that cap was the evidence of her battle, the chemotherapy that had stolen her hair, but not her spirit. Her mother had promised her this trip for months, something special to look forward to during the difficult treatments. The family had saved for this London visit for nearly a year. Emma's father, David, had worked double shifts at the factory, while Sarah took on extra cleaning jobs. They wanted to give their daughter something beautiful, something that would make her smile during the hardest period of their lives. Emma had circled this date on the calendar with a red marker, counting down the days even when she felt too sick to get out of bed. As the ceremony began, the guards marched in perfect formation, their red tunics brilliant against the gray stone of the palace. Their bearskin caps added impressive height, and their faces remained stern and unmovable. Emma watched with wonder, her small hand pressed against the cold metal barrier. She had read about these guards in her books at the hospital, learning how they protected the Queen and never broke their stance no matter what happened around them. The crowd pressed closer, adults jostling for the perfect photograph. Emma found herself squeezed between taller bodies, her view blocked by coats and camera bags. She tried standing on her tiptoes, but weakness from her latest treatment made her legs wobble. Her mother noticed and lifted her up, but Sarah's arms were not as strong as they once were. Months of stress and sleepless nights in hospital chairs had taken their toll on both parents. A guard named James Harrington stood at attention near the palace gates. He had served in the Queen's Guard for 3 years, taking immense pride in the tradition and discipline required. He had trained for months to perfect his march, to keep his face expressionless, regardless of what tourists did to provoke a reaction. People made funny faces at him, told jokes, even tried to touch him. He never flinched, never smiled, never acknowledged their existence. That was the rule, and James followed rules. But something caught his attention that morning. Through his peripheral vision, he noticed a small girl in a pink cap being lifted by her tired mother. The woman struggled to hold the child up, and James could see the exhaustion in both their faces. There was something different about this child, something that made his trained indifference waver for just a moment. Emma's eyes met his briefly. He saw pure joy mixed with obvious fatigue. She waved at him with a small, tentative hand. Most children waved at the guards, expecting no response, and usually moving on to wave at the next one. But Emma kept her hand raised, her smile hopeful. She believed in magic, in special moments, in the kindness of strangers dressed in magnificent uniforms. James had seen thousands of children during his service. They screamed, laughed, cried, and begged for attention. He had learned to tune them all out, to focus on his duty and maintain the stoic tradition expected of him. His commanding officers had been clear about the importance of protocol. The guards were symbols, not entertainers. They represented discipline, duty, and the unwavering strength of the monarchy. But this morning felt different. Perhaps it was the way the morning light caught the determination in that little girl's eyes. Perhaps it was the obvious love in her mother's strained expression. Or perhaps it was something deeper, a recognition that some moments transcend rules and regulations. James had a younger sister back home, healthy and full of life. Seeing this fragile child made something shift inside his chest. The ceremony continued around him. His fellow guards marched and turned with mechanical precision. The crowd cheered and clicked their cameras. Tour guides explained the history and significance of the traditions to eager listeners. Everything proceeded exactly as it had for generations, movement choreographed and predictable. Yet James found his attention drawn back to the little girl in the pink cap. She had stopped waving but continued watching him with fascination. Her mother had set her down, and Emma leaned heavily against the barrier, clearly tired but refusing to leave. There was determination in her small frame. a stubborn joy that refused to be diminished by obvious physical weakness. Something stirred in James. Something that challenged everything he had been taught about duty and protocol. He stood at a crossroads between tradition and compassion, between the rules that defined his role and the human instinct to bring light to a child who clearly needed it. The decision forming in his mind would break protocol in a way that could have serious consequences for his career. But looking at Emma's hopeful face, James began to realize that some rules existed to be broken when humanity demanded it. The decision crystallized in James's mind like ice forming on a winter pond. Every instinct told him to maintain his position, to remain the perfect statue that tourists expected. His training had been rigorous, designed to eliminate exactly this kind of emotional response. Yet here he stood, feeling his resolve crack under the weight of a 7-year-old's hopeful gaze. Emma's father had noticed his daughter's fixation on this particular guard. David knelt beside her, whispering something that made her giggle softly. The sound was like bells, clear and pure, despite the weakness that shadowed her movements. Sarah pulled out her phone, wanting to capture her daughter's joy at seeing the famous guards up close. These photos would matter later, reminders of a day when Emma felt well enough to travel and explore. The other tourists had begun to move along, following the guards to their next position. But the Morrison family remained, Emma refusing to leave her spot by the barrier. She had declared this guard was her favorite, though she could not explain why. Perhaps it was the kind eyes she sensed behind his stern expression, or maybe just a child's intuition about goodness in people. James felt sweat forming under his heavy, bearskin cap despite the cool morning air. His heart hammered in his chest, and he wondered if anyone could see the internal struggle playing out behind his blank expression. He thought of his commanding officer, a stern man who valued tradition above all else. He thought of his fellow guards, who would have to answer questions if he broke protocol. He thought of the potential consequences to his military career. But then he thought of his sister, healthy and carefree, and how devastated his family would be if she faced what this little girl was clearly facing. The pink cap told a story that needed no words. The fragile frame, the tired eyes, the determined smile, all painted a picture of courage that humbled him. This child had fought battles he could barely imagine. She was still here, still smiling, still finding joy in a simple morning at the palace. The next patrol rotation would begin in minutes. James would have to march to a different position, and the Morrison family would likely continue their tour of London. This moment would pass, becoming just another memory of a crowded morning outside Buckingham Palace. Unless he did something to make it different, to transform it into something special that Emma would carry with her through whatever challenges lay. His training screamed at him to stay still, to maintain discipline. But a deeper voice, one that spoke of compassion and human connection, urged him toward action. James had joined the military to serve, to protect, to make a difference. Could serving not also mean bringing light to a child fighting for her life? Could protecting not include guarding the innocence and joy of someone who had already lost so much? The senior guard began the commands for the next formation change. This was James's last chance. In moments he would have to move, and the opportunity would vanish like morning mist. Emma had started to turn away, her mother gently pulling her toward the next attraction on their carefully planned itinerary. Sarah wanted to show Emma everything London had to offer in their limited time here. Something broke inside James. A wall of protocol and fear that suddenly seemed far less important than the child walking away. Before he could second-guess himself, before his training could reassert control, James did the unthinkable. He broke stance. His rigid posture softened, and his stern expression melted into something warmer. His eyes, which had stared straight ahead for the past hour, shifted to look directly at Emma. The movement was subtle, but unmistakable. Several tourists gasped, their cameras immediately swinging toward him. This was the moment they all hoped for, but rarely witnessed, a guard breaking the famous impassive facade. But James was not doing this for the tourists or their photos. Every ounce of his attention focused on the little girl in the pink cap. Emma had paused at the sound of gasps around her. She turned back, her eyes widening as she realized the guard was looking at her, actually seeing her. For a moment, time seemed to suspend itself. The noise of the crowd faded. The commands being shouted in the distance became distant echoes. There was only a soldier and a child, sharing a moment that transcended duty and illness and fear. Then James did something even more remarkable. Slowly, deliberately, he smiled. It was not a huge grin, but a gentle, warm expression that transformed his entire face. His eyes crinkled at the corners, radiating kindness and understanding. That smile said everything words could not convey in that public place. It said he saw her. It said she mattered. It said her courage was recognized and honored by someone who understood discipline and sacrifice. Emma's face lit up like sunrise breaking over the horizon. Her fatigue seemed to vanish, replaced by pure, radiant joy. She bounced on her toes, her small hand flying to her mouth in delighted surprise. Sarah gasped beside her daughter, her phone forgotten as tears instantly filled her eyes. David wrapped his arm around his wife, his own eyes suspiciously bright. But James was not finished. In a move that would certainly have consequences later, he raised his white-gloved hand to his bearskin cap. With deliberate ceremony, he gave Emma a salute. It was a proper military salute, crisp and respectful, the kind reserved for honoring superior officers and dignitaries. He was saluting a 7-year-old girl in a pink cap, and the gesture carried more weight than any formal ceremony. The crowd erupted in applause and cheers. Cameras clicked frantically as tourists scrambled to capture this unprecedented moment. Other guards maintained their positions, though James could sense their awareness of what he had done. His commanding officer would hear about this within minutes. There would be questions, possibly disciplinary action, certainly a stern conversation about the importance of maintaining protocol. None of that mattered now. Because Emma Morrison, a little girl fighting the hardest battle of her young life, was saluting him back with all the seriousness and pride she could muster, her smile brilliant enough to outshine the morning sun. The salute lasted only seconds, but those seconds stretched into something eternal. Emma stood straighter than she had in months. Her small hand pressed firmly to her forehead in perfect imitation of James's military precision. Pride radiated from every inch of her small frame. In that moment, she was not a sick child, but a soldier being recognized by a fellow warrior. Someone who understood what it meant to fight battles every single day. Sarah Morrison could not hold back her tears anymore. They streamed down her face as she watched her daughter experience this unexpected moment of magic. For months, she had watched Emma suffer through treatments that made her violently ill, through procedures that frightened her, through pain that no child should ever have to endure. Sarah had read countless bedtime stories in hospital rooms, had held Emma during nightmares, had tried desperately to maintain normalcy in a life that had become anything but normal. This trip to London represented so much more than a vacation. It was a promise kept, proof that life still held beautiful moments despite the darkness of illness. Sarah had worried that Emma would be too tired to enjoy anything, that they had pushed too hard in planning this journey. But seeing her daughter's face now, seeing that brilliant smile and the strength in her salute, Sarah knew every difficult moment had been worth it. David pulled out his own phone with shaking hands, capturing photo after photo of his daughter and the guard. He wanted to remember this forever, to have proof that kindness still existed in unexpected places. As a father, he had felt helpless watching Emma suffer. He could not take away her pain or fight her battle for her. But this guard had given Emma something precious, a moment of recognition and respect that honored her courage. James slowly lowered his salute and returned to attention, though his expression remained softer than regulation allowed. He could feel the eyes of his fellow guards on him, could sense the ripple of shock moving through the ranks. What he had done went against years of tradition and explicit orders. The Queen's Guard did not interact with tourists. They did not break stance. They certainly did not salute random children in the crowd. But James felt no regret. Looking at Emma's glowing face, he knew he had made the right choice. Some rules deserved to be broken when human compassion demanded it. Some traditions needed to bend when faced with genuine need. This child had reminded him why he truly served, not just to follow orders, but to make the world a little bit better in whatever way he could. The senior officer in charge of the detail had noticed the commotion. Captain Richard Matthews had served for 20 years and ran his unit with strict discipline. He was already making his way toward James's position, his face unreadable, but his posture suggesting displeasure. James knew he would face consequences, but he stood ready to accept them. He would do it again without hesitation if given the choice. Emma seemed to sense that her special moment was ending. She waved at James one more time, a wave filled with gratitude and joy. Then her parents gently guided her away from the barriers, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary, but not wanting to cause further trouble for the kind guard. As they walked away, Emma kept looking back, her smile never fading. Other tourists congratulated the Morrison family, sharing in their joy. An elderly woman stopped them, tears in her own eyes, telling them what a beautiful moment they had just experienced. A young couple asked if they could share the video they had recorded on social media, wanting the world to see this act of compassion. David and Sarah agreed, hoping that Emma's story might inspire others to choose kindness over protocol. Within minutes, several videos of the interaction had been posted online. People who had witnessed it shared their recordings across various platforms, adding captions about the touching moment between a guard and a sick child. The internet was often criticized for spreading negativity, but sometimes it served a greater purpose, amplifying moments of genuine human connection that deserve to be celebrated, Captain. Matthews reached James's position just as the next formation change was called. He said nothing immediately, simply giving James a look that promised a serious conversation later. James fell into line with his fellow guards, marching with the same precision as always. Though his mind remained on the little girl in the pink cap, he wondered how her battle was going, whether she would win her fight against cancer, whether she would remember this morning years from now. The Morrison family found a bench in St. James's Park. Needing to rest after the excitement, Emma sat between her parents, still chattering excitedly about the guard who had saluted her. She declared it the best moment of her entire life, better than any birthday or Christmas morning. She made her parents promise to print the photos and hang them in her hospital room, so she could look at them during her treatments. Sarah held her daughter close, breathing in the scent of the hospital shampoo they had to use because of Emma's sensitive skin. She thought about all the kind nurses and doctors who had cared for Emma, about the friends and family who had supported them through this nightmare. But this stranger, this guard, who owed them nothing, had given Emma something uniquely precious. He had seen her not as a sick child, but as someone worthy of military honors, someone whose courage deserved recognition. David checked his phone and gasped. The videos were spreading rapidly across social media. Thousands of people had already viewed them, sharing them with comments about faith in humanity being restored. News outlets were beginning to pick up the story, requesting permission to use the footage. The Morrison family's private moment was becoming something much larger, a symbol of compassion that people desperately needed to see. Emma noticed her father's surprise and asked what was happening. When David explained that people all over the world were watching her special moment, Emma's eyes went wide. She had not thought beyond her own joy, had not imagined that others might care about what had happened. The idea that her moment with the guard was touching hearts everywhere made her smile even brighter. Back at Buckingham Palace, James stood in Captain Matthews's office, prepared for discipline. But as he entered, he found not anger on his commanding officer's face, but something unexpected. The captain gestured for James to sit. It's an unusual informality that suggested this conversation would be different from what James anticipated. On the captain's desk sat a tablet showing one of the videos, paused on Emma's joyful face as she returned James's salute, a moment frozen in time that was changing more lives than either of them yet realized. Captain Matthews leaned back in his chair, studying James with an expression that mixed sternness with something softer. The office was quiet except for the ticking of an antique clock on the wall, each second marking the tension between military discipline and human compassion. James stood at attention, his hands clasped behind his back, ready to accept whatever punishment was deemed appropriate for his breach of protocol. The captain pressed play on the video, and both men watched in silence as the moment unfolded on screen. Emma's face lit up with joy, her small hand rising in that perfect salute. James saw himself through the camera's lens, saw the exact moment when duty gave way to humanity. When the video ended, Captain Matthews set down the tablet and looked directly at James. What happened out there was a clear violation of standing orders. The captain's voice was measured, professional. You know this, correct? James nodded, his jaw tight. He would not make excuses or try to justify his actions beyond the simple truth that it had felt like the right thing to do. He had weighed duty against compassion and chosen compassion. Willing to face the consequences of that choice, the captain stood and walked to the window overlooking the palace grounds. Tourists still milled about, cameras raised, hoping for another glimpse of the famous guards. After a long moment of silence, Captain Matthews spoke again, his voice carrying a weight of experience and wisdom. In my 20 years of service, I have seen guards stand motionless through rainstorms, blazing heat and every manner of provocation. I have prided myself on maintaining the highest standards of discipline and tradition. James waited, unsure where this was leading. The captain turned from the window, and James was surprised to see emotion flickering across the older man's usually stoic face. But I have also learned that true service is not just about following orders blindly. It is about understanding why we serve and who we serve. That little girl did not need our protocol. She needed our humanity. The words hung in the air between them. Captain Matthews returned to his desk and pulled up more videos on his tablet. Look at this, he said, scrolling through social media posts. Millions of people have seen what you did this morning. News outlets from around the world are covering the story. People are calling it the most touching moment they have witnessed in years. Messages of support are flooding in from everywhere. James felt overwhelmed by the response. He had acted in a moment of impulse, thinking only of bringing joy to one sick child. He had never imagined that his small gesture would resonate so widely. The captain showed him comments from cancer survivors, from parents of sick children, from veterans, from people across every demographic. They all shared a common theme: hope restored, faith in humanity renewed, belief that kindness still mattered. However, Captain Matthews continued, his tone becoming more serious again. We still have regulations to uphold. What you did while moving cannot become standard practice. We must maintain discipline and tradition. James nodded, understanding the delicate balance his commanding officer faced. But, the captain added with the hint of a smile, I believe this situation calls for discretion rather than discipline. Consider this a verbal warning, off the record. Not let us move forward. Relief flooded through James, though he tried not to show it. He had been prepared to accept a formal reprimand, possibly even removal from the Queen's Guard. Instead, he was being given a second chance, an acknowledgement that sometimes breaking the rules served a higher purpose. He thanked the captain and was dismissed, turning to his duties with a new appreciation for the wisdom of experienced leadership. Meanwhile, the Morrison family had returned to their hotel room. Emma was exhausted but happier than her parents had seen her in months. She insisted on watching the videos on her father's phone over and over, each viewing bringing fresh delight. She practiced her salute in the mirror, straightening her shoulders and lifting her chin with military precision. Sarah watched her daughter with a mixture of joy and heartbreak. Grateful for this moment of normalcy in their abnormal life, the hotel phone rang, startling them all. It was the front desk, apologizing for the intrusion but explaining that several news organizations were requesting interviews with the family. Apparently, the story had exploded across social media. People wanted to know more about the brave little girl who had captured a guard's heart. David and Sarah looked at each other, uncertain how to respond to this sudden attention. Emma overheard and asked what the reporters wanted. When her parents explained, she surprised them with her enthusiasm. She wanted to share her story, wanted others to know about the kind guard, and maybe inspire other people to be kind too. She had spent so much time feeling powerless against her illness, but now she had something positive to contribute. Her parents agreed, deciding that if Emma wanted to share her story, they would support her decision. That evening, a local news crew came to their hotel. They treated Emma with gentle respect, asking questions about her experience in her battle with cancer. Emma spoke with surprising eloquence for a 7-year-old, describing how scared she had been during treatments, but how the guard's salute had made her feel strong and brave. She said it reminded her that there were good people in the world who cared about others, even strangers. The interview aired that night and was picked up by national networks by morning. Emma's story, combined with the viral videos, created a wave of positive attention. Donation links for childhood cancer research were shared alongside the videos, and people began contributing in Emma's honor. The story had evolved from a simple moment of kindness into a movement, reminding people to choose compassion over convenience, connection over protocol. Back at Buckingham Palace, James watched the news coverage in his barracks. His fellow guards had been supportive, many admitting they might have done the same thing in his position. Some shared their own stories of wanting to break protocol for similar reasons, but lacking the courage to actually do it. James realized his action had given others permission to acknowledge their humanity within the rigid structure of military service the palace received thousands of letters and emails in the days following the incident. Most praised James's compassion and thanked him for reminding the world about the importance of kindness. Some shared their own stories of illness, loss, and the small gestures that had helped them through dark times. A few criticized the breach of protocol, arguing that traditions existed for important reasons and should never be violated. Palace officials found themselves in an unusual position. They could not officially condone breaking protocol. Yet they also recognized the immense positive publicity the incident had generated. After careful consideration, they released a statement acknowledging that while guards are expected to maintain tradition, they also appreciated the guards' compassion and hoped Emma's health would improve. It was a diplomatic response that satisfied most observers. Emma's oncologist called the Morrison family with interesting news. The stress reduction from positive experiences could actually benefit Emma's treatment outcomes. The joy she felt from the incident with the guard had measurable effects on her mood, appetite, and engagement with her treatment plan. While the salute could not cure her cancer, it had given her something equally valuable: hope and the will to keep fighting with renewed strength. 3 weeks after the incident at Buckingham Palace, Emma Morrison sat in her familiar spot in the pediatric oncology ward. The bright murals on the walls and cheerful decorations did little to mask the clinical reality of the place. But today felt different. Nurses and other patients kept stopping by her room. Having seen the viral videos and wanting to meet the famous girl who had inspired so many people around the world, Emma's treatment. The chemotherapy made her sick, the procedures frightened her, and the fatigue was overwhelming. But now, when things got particularly difficult, she would close her eyes and remember that moment outside the palace. She would picture the guard's kind smile and feel his salute honoring her courage. It gave her strength when her body wanted to give up, when the pain seemed too much to bear. Sarah had printed and framed several photos from that morning, hanging them on the walls of Emma's hospital room. Other children undergoing treatment would visit just to see the pictures and hear Emma retell the story. She never tired of sharing it, each telling reinforcing her own belief that she could overcome the challenges ahead. The story had become more than a memory. It had transformed into a source of power that helped her face each difficult day. The hospital staff noticed a marked improvement in Emma's attitude and cooperation with treatment. She complained less, fought the nurses less, and approached her therapy sessions with determination rather than dread. Her oncologist documented this change in her medical records, noting the profound psychological impact of positive experiences on pediatric patients. Emma had become an informal case study in how hope and recognition could complement medical treatment. Meanwhile, James Harrington had returned to his normal duties at Buckingham Palace. The initial media frenzy had died down, though tourists still pointed him out occasionally, recognizing him from the videos. Some would ask if he was the guard who had saluted the sick girl, and though protocol prevented him from responding, his slight smile usually confirmed their suspicions. He had become something of a legend among his peers, the guard who had chosen heart over regulation. One afternoon, James received an unexpected summons to the palace administrative offices. He arrived to find Captain Matthews waiting with an official-looking envelope. The captain explained that the Morrison family had sent a letter through official channels, specifically requesting it be delivered to James. Such communication was unusual, but not unprecedented, and given the unique circumstances, it had been approved. James opened the envelope with careful hands. Inside was a letter written in a child's handwriting, with some words clearly spelled phonetically and others helped by adult corrections. Emma had written to thank him personally for what he had done. She described how his salute made her feel brave and strong, how she thought about it during her hardest treatments, how it reminded her that people could be kind even when they did not have to be. The letter included a drawing Emma had made during one of her hospital stays. It showed a tall guard in a red uniform and bearskin cap, standing next to a small girl in a pink hat. Both figures were saluting each other, and above them, Emma had drawn a rainbow and written the words, "Thank you for seeing me," in careful block letters. James felt his throat tighten as he studied the simple but powerful artwork. At the bottom of the letter, Sarah and David had added their own message. They explained Emma's diagnosis in more detail, describing the long road ahead, but expressing gratitude that their daughter had experienced such a memorable moment of joy. They told James that his act of kindness had become a touchstone for their entire family, a reminder that even in their darkest days, light could break through. They did not expect a response, but wanted him to know the profound impact his choice had made. Captain Matthews gave James a moment to compose himself before speaking. The family has also requested, through proper channels, if you might be willing to meet with Emma during her next visit to London. She has another treatment milestone coming up, and they plan to celebrate by returning to the city. The palace is considering the request. Would you be interested in such a meeting? James did not hesitate. He said yes immediately, knowing that meeting Emma properly would mean more to him than any military commendation. Captain Matthews nodded approvingly and promised to work out the details through the appropriate administrative channels. Such a meeting would be unprecedented, but then again, so had been James's original gesture. Sometimes new precedents needed to be set. Over the following weeks, arrangements were carefully made. The palace wanted to ensure Emma's privacy while also acknowledging the special circumstances. It was decided that James, while off-duty, could meet the Morrison family during a private tour of certain areas not normally open to the public. This way, the meeting would feel special without creating a circus that might overwhelm Emma or disrupt Palace. Emma counted down the days to the meeting with the same excitement she had shown before the original trip to London. Her treatments were showing positive results, and her doctors were cautiously optimistic about her progress. She told everyone who would listen that she was going to meet her guard friend again. They were going to have a real conversation. She practiced what she wanted to say, writing down questions and stories to share. The day finally arrived in late autumn. The Morrison family was escorted through a private entrance by a palace representative. Emma wore her favorite dress and a new hat, this one decorated with a crown pattern she had chosen specially for the occasion. Despite her nerves, she walked with confidence, excited but no longer starstruck. She had learned that sometimes the people you admire are just good people trying to do the right thing. James waited in a small receiving room, wearing his dress uniform but appearing far more relaxed than he had been during their first encounter. When the Morrison family entered, Emma stopped in the doorway, suddenly shy. But James smiled the same warm smile he had given her that morning outside the palace, and Emma found her courage. She walked forward and, in a gesture that surprised everyone, saluted him. James returned the salute with full military precision, and then he did something that felt completely natural. He knelt down to Emma's level, making himself smaller so they could speak eye to eye. Emma giggled at seeing the tall guard crouching before her, and the ice was broken. They began talking, tentatively at first. Then, with growing ease, Emma told James about her treatments, about how hard they were, but how she kept thinking about his salute when things got scary. She showed him the photos that hung in her hospital room and gave him the drawing she had made of the two of them. James listened with full attention, treating her words with the respect he would give any important dignitary. He told her that he had a younger sister, and that thinking of her had reminded him to do the kind thing rather than the easy thing. Sarah and David watched the interaction with tears streaming down their faces. This stranger had given their daughter something no medical treatment could provide: validation of her courage and proof that kindness existed in unexpected places. They thanked James repeatedly, their words inadequate to express the depth of their gratitude. James assured them that Emma had given him something equally valuable: A reminder of why compassion should never be sacrificed to protocol. The meeting lasted an hour, filled with conversation, laughter, and moments of comfortable silence. Palace staff took photos at the family's request, capturing images that would join the others on Emma's hospital walls. When it was time to leave, Emma hugged James tightly, whispering that he was her hero. James whispered back that she was his hero too, that her bravery inspired him every single day he put on his uniform, and that she reminded him what true service really meant. 2 years passed like pages turning in a book, each chapter bringing new challenges and unexpected joys. Emma Morrison continued her battle against cancer with the fierce determination that had always defined her spirit. The treatments remained difficult, with setbacks that tested the entire family's resolve. But through it all, the memory of that morning at Buckingham Palace served as an anchor, a reminder that courage came in many forms and kindness could appear when least expected. The viral videos from that day never completely disappeared from the internet. Every few months, someone would rediscover and reshare them, introducing new audiences to the story of the guard and the little girl. Comments continued to pour in from around the world. People sharing how the simple act of compassion had inspired them to be kinder in their own lives. Teachers used the videos in classrooms to discuss empathy and courage. Therapists showed them to patients struggling with illness. Demonstrating the power of human connection, James Harrington continued his service with the Queen's Guard. Though the experience with Emma had fundamentally changed his perspective on duty, he still followed protocol and maintained the discipline expected of his position. But he carried with him a deeper understanding of why those traditions existed. Service was not about rigid rules, but about protecting and honoring the people those rules were meant to serve. Sometimes honoring people meant seeing them, truly seeing them, and responding with humanity. Emma's medical team celebrated each milestone in her recovery with cautious optimism. Cancer treatment was never a straight path forward. There were complications and setbacks that required adjustments to her therapy plan. But Emma approached each obstacle with remarkable resilience. When other children in the oncology ward felt discouraged, Emma would share her story about the guard, passing along the strength the gesture had given her. She became a source of hope for others fighting their own battles. The Morrison family had learned to navigate their new normal, finding joy in small moments while acknowledging the weight of their ongoing struggle. David continued working his factory shifts, though management had become more flexible about time off when Emma needed her parents at the hospital. Sarah had connected with other parents of sick children, forming a support network that helped them all survive the emotional toll. They had discovered that community formed in the hardest places. Bonds forged through shared suffering and hope. On Emma's 9th birthday, the family received an unexpected package. Inside was a letter from Buckingham Palace, along with a special gift. James had arranged through proper channels in his own savings for Emma to receive a custom-made replica of a Queen's Guard cap, sized perfectly for a child. The accompanying letter explained that this cap had been specially created to honor her courage, making her an honorary member of the Guard in recognition of her bravery. Emma wore that cap everywhere for weeks, refusing to take it off except when absolutely necessary. She wore it to her treatment appointments, where nurses and doctors admired it and heard the story behind its creation. She wore it to school when she was well enough to attend, where her classmates thought it was the coolest thing they had ever seen. She wore it in the photographs her parents took to document her journey, a symbol of the unexpected friendship that had sustained her through the hardest period of her young life. James saw photos of Emma wearing the cap through the carefully monitored communication channel that had been established between them. The palace had allowed them to exchange occasional letters and photos, supervised to ensure appropriateness and privacy. James treasured these updates, each one showing a little girl growing stronger despite her ongoing medical challenges. He kept her drawings in his locker, pulling them out when his own day felt difficult or discouraging. As Emma's 9th birthday turned into autumn and then winter, her medical team delivered news the family had barely dared hope for. Emma's latest scans showed significant improvement. The cancer was in retreat, and while doctors remained cautious about using the word remission, they were more optimistic than they had been in 2 years. The treatment plan was working, and Emma's body was finally winning the war being fought inside it. The Morrison family celebrated quietly, not wanting to tempt fate, but unable to contain their relief and joy. They decided to mark the occasion with another trip to London, this time as a celebration, rather than a desperate attempt to create happy memories. Emma, now taller and stronger, though still bearing the marks of her treatment, insisted their first stop had to be Buckingham Palace. She wanted to stand in the same spot where everything had changed. Wanted to salute the guards on duty in honor of the one guard who had saluted her first. Palace officials learned of the planned visit through the communication channel with James. Quietly. Arrangements were made for James to be on duty that particular morning, stationed at the exact location where he had first seen Emma 2 years earlier. No promises were made to the Morrison family about this. It was simply a gesture of kindness from an institution learning to balance tradition with compassion. The morning was crisp and clear as the Morrison family approached the palace barriers. Emma, wearing her honorary guard cap and standing on legs that no longer trembled with weakness, searched the line of guards with eager eyes. And there, in the exact same position as before, stood James Harrington. Their eyes met across the crowd, and mutual recognition sparked like electricity. This time, James did not break protocol. He remained at attention, his face showing the proper stern expression required of his position. But Emma understood. She was older now, wiser about the world and its necessary rules. She did not need him to break stance again. She knew what he had sacrificed for her that first time, understood the risk he had taken. That original gesture had been enough to carry her through 2 years of struggle, and its power had not diminished with time. Emma stepped to the front of the barrier and executed a perfect military salute. Her form improved by 2 years of practice and determination. She held the salute with unwavering steadiness, honoring not just James, but every person who had helped her survive her battle. She saluted the nurses who had held her hand during frightening procedures, the doctors who had never given up on her, the parents who had sacrificed everything to keep fighting, and the stranger in a red uniform who had reminded her that courage deserved recognition. James could not salute back, not without breaking the rules again. But Emma saw something better than a salute. She saw tears form in his eyes, saw the slight tremble in his jaw as he fought to maintain composure, saw the pride and joy radiating from him despite the rigid military bearing. Those tears said everything that needed to be said. They told her he had thought about her over the past 2 years, worried about her, hoped for her recovery. They told her that their connection had meant as much to him as it had to her. The crowd around them sensed something special was happening, though most did not understand the full story. Cameras captured the moment as Emma held her salute for a full minute, standing strong and proud. When she finally lowered her hand, she nodded at James with a maturity beyond her 9 years. He gave her the smallest nod in return, barely perceptible but unmistakable to those who knew what to look for. As the Morrison family walked away from the palace, Emma looked back one final time. James remained at his post, a perfect statue of military discipline. But Emma knew the truth that others could not see. Behind that stern expression was a kind man who had chosen compassion over protocol, who had seen a sick child and decided her need for recognition mattered more than rules. That choice had rippled outward in ways neither of them could have imagined, touching millions and reminding the world that humanity should never be sacrificed to tradition. Years later, when Emma was healthy and strong, fully in remission and living the normal childhood her parents had feared she might never have, she would tell the story of the Royal Guard to anyone who would listen. She told it to her younger siblings when they were born, explaining how a stranger's kindness had helped save their sister's life. She told it in her college admission essay, writing about resilience and the importance of human connection. She told it at fundraisers for childhood cancer research, using her experience to raise money that would help other families fighting similar battles. And James, who eventually left the Queen's Guard and became a teacher, told the story too. He shared it with his students when teaching lessons about courage, explaining that breaking rules sometimes required more bravery than following them. He kept Emma's drawings framed in his classroom, pointing to them when students complained about their own small problems, reminding them that real courage was fighting impossible battles with grace and hope. The viral videos from that morning were eventually archived in multiple digital libraries, preserved as an example of humanity at its finest. Historians noted them as a small but significant moment when tradition bent to accommodate compassion. When an individual chose to honor a child's courage over institutional protocol, the moment became a case study in ethics courses, a reminder that rules served people, not the other way around. But beyond the videos and the fame and the lessons learned, the true legacy of that morning lived in two hearts that had been forever changed. Emma carried forward the knowledge that she was worthy of recognition, that her struggle had meaning and her courage deserved honor. James carried forward the understanding that service meant seeing people truly and responding to their needs, even when doing so required personal risk. Both had learned that a single moment of authentic human connection could create ripples that spread far beyond what anyone could imagine. That choosing kindness over convenience was always worth it, and that sometimes the smallest gestures carried the greatest power to change lives forever.